Smile, everybody. This is very significant. I'm going to explain why. My name is Carl Tonnert. I'm president of the European Association of Geographers. Amongst other things, I work on a number of projects associated with digital information. And I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about the freedom of information. And I'd like to thank the organisers, in particular Elena, for inviting me to come and talk with you. I'm a geographer, so I'm at home here. Iceland is a wonderful country for geographers. I'm very grateful, as I said, to be here and looking forward to perhaps challenging you about what's coming next in terms of digital information. I'm going to start by saying it's a very exciting time to be a geographer. Geography is in the news all the time. How many of you use geography as a means to educate people inside prison? I'd be really interested to know. Very few. I had 3-4 hands only. And that for me is very interesting because geography is about the world around us. It's about understanding our world. And I'm going to try and explain through some projects that we're involved in how every citizen really should have some aspect of geographical education if they are to live in the world, in our world. This is my association. We're involved in quite a lot of projects. We're also heavily involved in lobbying politicians for the strength of our subject. In many countries, the value of geography is not really understood. And I would be delighted to talk about that, but at another occasion. We produced some interactive products. This is the Latvian version of our GeoCube. GeoCube, geo-cube.eu. You'll find some leaflets next to the coffee over there about some of our projects and also about GeoCube. GeoCube is about trying to help people understand what geography is and what geographers do. And I'm particularly going to talk about employment and the digital world and how the digital geography is actually transforming our society. And I'm going to use, I've already taken your picture with the tablet. Many of you I see are using mobile devices, phones, laptops, tablets here. That society is very much now being enriched with information, lots of information. And that's going to be the talk I'm going to give you this morning. We have a couple of journals. So those of you who are using geography in your education, we'd love to receive papers from you. In particular, this one, the Review of International Geography Education Online. It's a free, open journal. You can access it. It's about people who are using geography, sharing their practice, the way they use geography to help motivate young and not so young people. These are our projects. I'm particularly today going to talk about the bottom one, digitalearth.eu, and a project called SpaceIt, Education for Spatial Citizenship. And that's our next conference. We're an association like you, European members, probably about the same size. Our next conference is in Malta this time next year. So really, I'll start my talk with this quotation from a dear friend of mine, Joseph Kursky. He's saying that this interconnected world we live in, you know, we look at our phones about 300 times a day. Did you realise that? Think about it. There's been some research which has shown this. And this interconnected world we live in is challenging education, all forms of education. And he's suggesting it's putting pressure to change the entire education structure. And EU policy, which is what I'm going to introduce this talk with, has more or less agreed with that. Europe 2020 is the lifeline to take us out of the economic crisis that we have been in. That's the plan. And it's a strategy for smart, sustainable and inclusive growth for all sorts, including the over 60s like me. The policy context is a 10-year growth strategy. It has a number of priorities. You can see them highlighted, I think, in blue. Smart. I'm going to talk about smart, what that means in a minute. Towards the end of the talk. Sustainable. Not something we're going to throw away, but we're going to maintain it. And inclusive, and that means everybody. And that's why I'm really delighted to be here talking to you, because I really need to know what are the challenges. I don't know your challenges. I'm not an expert in your field. What I want to do, though, is look where Europe is going, and then perhaps start the debate about how do we create that inclusive society. And it's about transparent, effective economic governance, where the citizen can connect to the politician. Every citizen can connect to the politician. These are the 5 targets that EU 2020 has. Big targets. 75% of the working age population will be employed. That there will be GDP invested in research. That we need to care about climate change because it's affecting us right now. And that's something we really need to care about. Who's caring about it? Which academic discipline? This is why I'm disappointed that only a handful of you are teaching about geography. One of these great movements that we're embracing, climate change is one of those things that we really need to be on top of. We need to start thinking about how we're going to deal with it. EU 2020 is also about education. It's about reducing the rates of early school leaving. It's about raising the numbers of people completing third-level university, higher education. It's about fighting poverty and social exclusion. These terms obviously must relate to your work. They certainly relate to mine. These are the actions in Europe which are trying to create this. It's the list at the bottom, the digital society. The photograph I just took of you. It's about youth on the move, but it's really about all education, about enabling mobility, real and virtual. It's about encouraging innovation. And not just encouraging it, but making it happen, implementing innovation. It's also about climate, competitiveness, employment, the agenda for new skills. I'll come back to that in a minute, and it's about fighting poverty. These are the key actions around which all funding will be based over the next 7 years. And they're being decided right now. The final detail is being put to the agenda for Europe 2020. It's also about accessibility. If you get into the European websites, it's about enabling e-accessibility, electronic accessibility to use ICT on an equal basis, everybody, with others, and enabling that to happen. The flagship policy group is the digital agenda. And the digital agenda is trying to make access available to everyone. There are a number of targets. It's about opening up a single market so we can buy goods online. It's about enabling standards in data. I'll talk about that briefly a little bit later on. It's about how much can you trust the information you're sending. I come back to the picture I took of you. I can send it now on Twitter. Do you want me to send it?
Yeah.
I have captured your information without asking you. Do you want me to tweet that? Is that something I could already have done it, actually, for all you know. And so that information and the freedom of information and the implication that it has is really very, very significant. And educating about this information is really important, about the security of it and the trust of that information. It's about when I go on the internet and find information, how true is it? Can I believe it or not? That's also very, very important. It's also about education, digital literacy, skills, and inclusion. And I highlight that one in particular. And we've been lobbying Mrs. Kroes, who's in charge of the digital agenda, to really help her understand that how this transformation is happening, especially from a geographical perspective. Why do I mean geographical? My phone is saying where I am. That means we can map where you are from a tweet I send, or a Facebook message I post, or whatever I want. I can map that. I do map. I take maps of thousands, hundreds of thousands of tweets and map them, because we don't turn off the location services on our mobile devices so people can know where we are. Obviously, we remove, when scientists are using this data, they remove the personal element, and you just become a number rather than a person. But that data is all there. It's called unvolunteered geographic information, and it has a really big significance to the sort of developments that are taking place. And these developments, these societal challenges that Europe has been facing for more than 20 years, like water, forest fires, earthquakes, like migration of people, like economic development, have resulted in significant expenditure in gathering information about us, about the things we do, about the places we are. It's led to three things. It's led to open governance. The European Commission want to make their governance more transparent. And therefore, through the media, social media, there are more opportunities for citizens to interact. You can go to Commissioner Kroes's blog right now. You can click on Contact Me and send her an email. You will get a reply. I do. I email her once a month. I point her to my blog. I'm lobbying for the things I believe in. So the politicians want that interaction. They actually need to know what we are feeling and what we are saying. And they need to make the right decisions. The good politicians, I will say. Mrs. Kroes is one of those. She's an amazing person, 72 years old, and far more active than I will ever be in my life. But she is an amazing person. So they actually want to hear from us. What are the things that are important? So that open governance is very significant. Open data, I'm going to come back to that. Information today in Europe is free, largely because of Mrs. Kroes. In the digital agenda, she announced, with the agreement of all the ministers in the EU, that all data gathered by the public, by states, national states, by public authorities, will be free. It's already supposed to be free. So that freedom of information is already there. And therefore we need to use that data in a positive way. It's already happening. I'll show you a couple of examples later on. And then finally we need to develop this Europe 2020 vision whereby education and training becomes very, very important. The critical thing, as I said, it's a wonderful time to be a geographer, because geographic information is needed by everybody these days. You know, to look up the bus timetable to get back to Reykjavik on your phone. That data has been gathered. Do you know where the bus is? Because there's a little sensor on the bus locating where it is, so you can see how many minutes away it is. That's one example, freedom of information. That information is readily available to anyone who wants to go out there and get it and then to use it for the benefit of society. That's very, very important. But the question I ask is, what about education? And I'm going to sort of say that education has so far forgotten about the freedom of information that we don't educate for the freedom of information, and we need to do it desperately, because there are lots of issues that we need to deal with in terms of the freedom of information. The Directorate General Education and Culture in the EU has an initiative called New Skills, New Jobs. In other words, there's a mismatch between the skills we are giving people from our education and the jobs that are necessary to be done today. I'm going to give you some data about that in a second. The European Commission has undertaken research and identified that Europe needs to scale up the educational use of ICT. I think most people would probably agree with that. But not only scale it up, but we actually need to make it much more meaningful and much more relevant for 21st century society. So they've had a project called Creative Classrooms, and the Creative Classrooms have identified lots of factors that are going to change education and teaching in the future. I highlight 3 here particularly. The first one has got to be of interest to you: networking with the real world. You know, your work is probably in a closed society. In many cases for obvious reasons. But networking with the real world is something that people living in the real world and people being out in the real world, that we want people to be better out, are going to need. They're going to need those skills of how do you network in the real world. Secondly, there's an open education revolution taking place out there. The e-books. Textbooks will disappear. I'm predicting within 3 years we won't have textbooks at all. Everything's going to be on the iPad or the mobile device in some way. We won't need textbooks. Textbooks are expensive. They're out of date by the time you've got them. In many cases, they're irrelevant. In many cases, not all cases. And thirdly, there's going to be a move towards personalized learning. The idea that the individual decides what they need to know, when they need to know it, how they need to know it. And so moving from large classes to educating an individual to understand their needs, their own needs, is going to be very, very important. So come back to this information perspective, freedom of information. Geographic data is a key European policy. When Europe is making decisions about what they're going to do about transport, about what they're going to do about energy, the energy we need, what they're going to do about fisheries, what they're going to do about agriculture, they need data to make the right decisions. And so for the last 10 years or so, this geographic data has been a key policy. Under what's called the INSPIRE Directive, all EU countries have been moving towards gathering data that can be compared across borders, so that there is no border. Before, country A was collecting this information, and country B was collecting the same information, so you could never see what was going on across Europe. The INSPIRE Directive has standardized information and has given us data that gives you European comparisons. Very similar to the previous speaker, but across the whole of Europe, we can take data and we can see which countries are being successful at doing what. Not to hit the countries over the head to say they're not being successful, but to be able to identify countries that are doing interesting things and being successful so that other countries can learn from them. It's a positive purpose. And so the INSPIRE Directive has been very, very significant. Just to give you some ideas about why it's significant. Mrs. Kroes announced an open data strategy for Europe in about a year ago, about 16 months ago. She said, the best way to get value from data is to give it away, not to hold on to it and try and sell it. Give it away. And London, the City of London, and the Transport in London were the first agency to decide to open up all their data. They were really frightened. You know, the person on the bus waiting for the bus and it doesn't come. They thought that they would have an avalanche of complaints. The inverse was the case. The moment somebody understood that a bus wasn't coming along because there was an accident half a mile away, they began to realize that running a complex transportation system for a city like London is very, very difficult. In other words, the public began to understand the complexity of the real world. Why is that important, you might say? Well, the data that was made freely available has resulted in more than 2,000 companies developing, creating apps for the phone, creating opportunities for the use of that data, which previously had been locked up and never used before, to create new jobs. It's estimated 10,000 new jobs were created simply because of releasing that data in London. And that data has led to all sorts of new and improved developments. And it also means that the population are beginning to understand some of the issues that are being faced within that. And so Mrs. Cruz challenged business, the bottom line. I say to private business, open up your data. It's starting to happen. Early developers were the UK, Italy, and France. All public data has been free there for about 2 to 3 years. The Dutch government released its data at the beginning of 2012, the Finnish government in the middle of 2012. Iceland was at the beginning of February, at the beginning of January, even though they're not in the EU. This recognition that releasing the data brings added value. Maybe the people who want the data now need the services to help them use the data, so that people who collect the data actually do make their money as well. But it's also led to huge development and growth within almost all the countries in Europe. And I dare say if you go back to your homelands and look, is there a free open data website for public information, you'll find it's already there. What does it mean? It means 4 things. It means all the public sector information that's out there is now freely available. Anything that the public sector are generating about us, our households, our streets, our use of energy, and all those other things is now freely available. It's also about cultural data, your educators. A huge avalanche of free cultural information is now being made available. And in particular, I refer you to this website, Europeana. There are 3 million cultural artifacts, European cultural artifacts, that are freely available there. This week, they launched the app for the iPhone, Europeana app, free app, where you can actually examine and explore some of the art treasures of Europe for free. So it's not just numbers and messages, it's video clips, it's photographs, it's all sorts of other information. That's Europeana. An incredible resource. It's also about collaborative science. It's about research. Research information from next year will have to be, especially if it's funded by the EU, made publicly available. And that is the data. Not just the paper, the article, but the data that has been gathered from European funds. So open data has become very important. And the EU have launched their own open data portal. There it is. It's a beta test. It's in development still. But look at it. I screen grabbed this week. There are already nearly 6,000 European data sets available on that data portal. And that data is there available for anyone to use. A lot of it is environmental data. Inspire was passed through the political arena, through the government, on an environmental remit. That's why the geographers, like myself, are very interested in it. There's also this website. These are the public sector groups, the transportation, the flight people, people who are using water, energy, the public utilities. All their data now is also having to be made publicly available for anyone who wants to use it. And connected with that has been this latest initiative, the Grand Coalition for Digital Jobs. It's recognised that there's a huge shortage of the right sort of people with the right sorts of skills to be able to take that data and to use it. I'll talk about some numbers here. We in my association estimate 50,000 jobs right now cannot be filled to deal with all this data in Europe. 50,000 in America, 40,000 in China. There's a huge dearth around the world of people who can take this data and make some use of it. It's a big sector. And this sector is growing at 7 to 10% a year in terms of the number of people that are required. Some countries have begun to realize this. So particularly in Belgium, Estonia, and Finland, they are rapidly changing the curriculum they're teaching. In Belgium, the Prime Minister there set up a special task force. My colleague is involved in it. where they really need to do something urgently. They are missing 100 PhDs a year. They are missing 1,000 bachelors a year. They are missing 10,000 people with high school leaving certificates who can use this data already, right now. Those are huge numbers. So important they've arranged this special task force to try and deal with it. That's how rapidly things are changing. You know, how long ago did you have a mobile phone with internet capability? I was one of the early adopters. It's less than 5 years. That's how rapid things are changing. It's a huge change that's happening. And my association has developed some projects to try to deal with this, try and support learning in these areas. One project is called digitalearth.eu, with the aim to try and integrate digital earth education into the digital agenda. We did a needs analysis in 2009, and we identified that there were really very few teachers doing this work, and there were almost no young people leaving schools or universities with the right sort of skills, awareness, knowledge, and experience. So what we've experienced in these last 5 years, since the iPhone, the tablet revolution, is this huge technology push. It's pushing us along, and we are really, as educators, struggling to keep up with it. In my own sphere, let me just talk you through these 4 points. All that data can be mapped. Remember, I said about 80 or 90% of the data we produce is geographical. It's got a locational perspective. I can take that data and produce maps. I can do that now with free software on the internet, free apps, free software. I can push my data at any place at any time. If any of you follow some of the leading newspapers online, you will see they are A, providing maps, which are interactive, and B, also providing the data on which those maps are based on. I'm thinking of The Guardian in the UK, I'm thinking of a couple of the German newspapers, the New York Times. All these leading media organizations are recognizing the value and the importance of this data. I can now create my own map. I don't have to rely on the politician's map of what's going on. I can take that data, drag it into a mapping application on the internet, and it will draw me a map. I don't need to be able to have high-tech skills. What does this mean for the citizen? This means the citizen can produce maps to contradict what the politicians are saying. Politicians can make a policy. For example, on the use of energy, the citizen can now take that information and produce alternative scenarios. And not only that, they can then broadcast those scenarios. And the software that we're using is free. It's called ArcGIS Online. It's a free tool. It allows you to put any information in there, as long as it has an X and a Y coordinate, and to create maps. And these are some of the maps that we've created with some of the people that we've been involved in our training situation. This presentation, by the way, will be, I think, on the website, so the links and so on, I hope people will be able to get to them. So I realise I'm going very, very fast. But the significance is that any citizen can take this free software and create their own maps. So how many maps a week do you think are being made with this software? Any ideas? More than 1 million maps are being made a week. Right now, the software was released 7 months ago. It's one of about 20 different apps. But just on this software, more than 1 million maps are being made per week, many by companies and corporations. I'm using it with 10-year-olds. They can now have the freedom to create their own maps at all scales and levels, from an individual house or a school building right the way up to the whole world. Easy, half an hour to learn how to do it. So the world is really, really changing, and this freedom of information that's out there is transforming a lot of things that are going on potentially, and I think we should be reflecting that in our education. As part of our project, we've created a database of more than 3,000 new things that are on the internet based on geographic data. That's in the last 2 years. 3,000 new maps, new apps, new curriculum materials, new developments, where people are using this information to be able to present themselves. And that is very, very significant. I'll give you one example. This website, Eye on Earth, it's the EU Environment Agency website. It maps European data, that data that they collect about air, about water, about litter, about smell, about noise. They also collect lots of other scientific data. It's using the same software that I just showed you, just tarted up a little bit, made to look very fancy. You can add your own data to this. You can say, here in Iceland, the weather was awful. You can actually upload your own data. When they launched this about 9 or 10 months ago, within the first 2 weeks, 100,000 Europeans had added their own data about pollution to the map. And that is incredible. 100,000 citizens had taken their iPhone or their tablet or their laptop or their PC, had gone to this website and given some information about the place where they were and said whether it was polluted or not in some sort of scale. It's a citizens' revolution that this type of information and the software associated with it is actually making happen across Europe. 100,000 people, you think about that, that's quite incredible. And this geographic media, as we've called it, is so significant because newscasters are using it. I was watching the Icelandic news last night, and lo and behold, they were talking, although my Icelandic isn't very good, but they were talking about citizens responding to a website on Iceland similar to that, where they were giving their data. People giving their data, giving their information. And from my perspective, from our perspective in geography, we believe that we actually need to be talking about the sorts of skills that we really need if we're going to be operating within this digital society. And it's happening so quickly that educators don't get a chance to think about it. We believe that citizens really need to develop some spatial thinking perspective. Where they are, what they're about, what's around them, the interrelationships that they have with their world, wherever that world might be, whether it be inside or outside. And actually, how can you prepare people for being on the outside without them understanding their world? So I challenge you as prison educators to bring geography into your classrooms. Because part of understanding the person is about understanding the environment that you are in. And therefore, spatial thinking and what we call spatial citizenship is very important. We've had this project called Spatial Citizenship, which is halfway through. We're about 18 months into a 3-year project, thinking about what does it mean to be a spatial citizen. Jeremy Hebert got me thinking about it. When the internet, the Facebook revolution started, only 10 years ago, Facebook, think about it. He was suggesting we need to, these 4 skills. We need to collect information. We need to reflect. We need to connect. And we need to publish. We have to have our own opinion about what the information is all about. And I think this is really, his work is really, really very significant. The idea of collecting, reflecting, connecting, and also publishing. In whatever environment that they're in, people have to be given the freedom to express themselves. And that's really what spatial citizenship is all about. It's about the user, the citizen, not the expert or the IT person. It's about the user of the information. It's actually transformative. Our research appears to show that this participative action, being involved, feeling like you have a voice, it's transformative in terms of education, and it's about taking power. The fact that you're able to take power on the situation and have your own opinions and to be able to express those opinions in some way. The example is the Facebook revolution in North Africa. People took hold of Facebook. They couldn't use ordinary ways to communicate, so they used Facebook to organize themselves. If you're going to develop those types of transformative education, you're going to need to think about the sorts of competencies. We think that there are three. The first is technical. You need to have some sort of technology, but technology today is so easy, it's not really a barrier today. We need to have the competencies to evaluate in some way, to take hold of that information and try and make meaning of it. What does these pictures tell you? Taken from the media, what messages are they giving us? You know, the poles are melting. Or what about these ones? This is positive proof that climate change is really happening. The fact bikinis have got smaller. Yeah? Those are the messages the media give, especially the common media, the populist media. How you interpret the messages behind these things is really very important. And so therefore, understanding this geographic type media, we believe is very important. That means to know how it's constructed, to recognize the way it's constructed, to compare perspectives. There are always differences of opinion, to deconstruct the meaning in some way. And then finally, we believe also the ability to communicate your own ideas, to be able to negotiate this huge amount of data and information that's out there, and to be able to pick out the things that are really important in order to be able to make your own ideas and your own opinion of how you're going to behave in the world. That to us, I think, is very, very important. And we're thinking about an education that encourages people to formulate their own alternatives and to negotiate those in the real world, and also to communicate their ideas and opinions. This is a very different type of education that we're thinking about, that is needed because simply of the huge, enormous volume of data and information that's out there and flooding at us all the time in society. It is participative, this need. We need people to actively participate, not only online, but also in communities, in face-to-face situations, in volunteering scenarios, people with the right sorts of skills. There's a big EU push on volunteerism right now. They're looking to create a society where people will volunteer to support the things that are important to them. 100 million Europeans volunteer already. We're trying to, the EU, see it as a very high priority. So really, my association and the work we're doing is looking to try to create an education for spatial citizenship, one that is constructive, constructivist. I'm speaking to educators, so I hope you know about constructivism a little bit, but where the learner can construct their own meaning and their own learning. Secondly, it's one that should be intercultural, reflecting on diversity of ideas, values, and behaviours, whatever the complex issue is. Thirdly, we believe very strongly that this education for spatial citizenship should be built on dialogue. The fact that often there is no right and wrong answer. These are dilemmas everybody faces. Often there is no right and wrong solution. Sometimes in the middle is the answer. And understanding that is something we're not used to. And finally, and most importantly, it is very definitely technological, because this is not going to be the end. Technology doesn't go away. The speed of technological change is increasing. And that's something that we need to prepare people for in our education. So we've got an evolution of a very advanced and sophisticated technological landscape. These things are really sophisticated. I'm not sophisticated, I know nothing about them, except I know how valuable they can be. Information really is power in some ways. And large organizations are using information and getting it into the hands of billions of people. You know, it's estimated 80% of all that information is geographical. For example, every photograph you take has a geographical tag where you took it, for example. So our lives are being more and more inundated with this information, but these issues still remain. How reliable is it? Who owns the information, the property rights, the ethical use of someone else's information? Do you claim it as yours or not? The transparency of how the data was gathered. You know, was it gathered also in an ethical way? You know, or is it unvolunteered? Also the security of that data, and as several of you were noting, the privacy of that data is very, very significant. We don't have the answers. The technological revolution has happened too quickly. We haven't solved these problems. These are big issues that Europe is struggling with right now. What Europe won't do is stop the freedom of information because it's too valuable. It is the root, so they say, of the economic transformation that Europe needs to go through between now and 2020. So I'm saying, as a geographer, I'm really excited. The future is geographical. These are all the pictures being taken. These are mobile phones. Every time your mobile phone is on and you send a text message, the internet knows where you are. That was midnight. That was just before midnight. That's big data. I see the rise of the citizen scientist. The person goes out with their mobile phone and sends scientific data back wherever to some central place where it can be mapped. It's already happening. These are a couple of European projects where people are using these devices to act as scientists. The future will be in the cloud. Not on a computer. You won't need a computer with hard memory. It'll all be up on the cloud. And with the cloud comes something called the Internet of Things. It's happening right now. Every light bulb can be connected to the internet. Everything that you plug in or that has some chips with it connected to Wi-Fi can be connected to the internet. So your fridge can tell you when you've run out of milk because the milk carton is empty. That is already the case. And the fridge can order the milk for you online, so it's delivered on a day when you're home, which you can control from a mobile device. But think of the power that gives. I'm talking 2020 now. I'm talking 7 years away. I'm not talking some vision in the future. This is happening already. What sort of education do we need for this? The Internet of Things is already here. The EU will invest a lot of money in it. Why? Because it allows us to make our cities more efficient, more smart. In a project, a pilot in Amsterdam, they saved the city 40% on running costs by switching power off when nobody's in the house, by the street lights going off when there's nobody passing. 40% cheaper to run our cities. You think of that. What can we spend the money on? The technology allows us to do it. We just don't have enough skilled people out there to create the tools and the technologies and then to manage them. This is where the internet is going. This is the technology. With smart cities, though, you need smart people. That's our challenge as educators. We need those smart people. So, in conclusion, there's a real EU commitment to freedom of information. It's already there. Every country is supposed to have a website with all its public data that any citizen can take and can access. But there's been no focus on education. We've had two projects, one called Digital Earth, the other one called Spatial Citizenship, trying to explore what this really means for education. And I conclude with a quote from the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Everyone has the right to freedom of expression, and this includes the right to seek, impart, and receive information. This is the key to achieving many other rights, securing democracy and enabling development. And I thank you very much.